Perhaps one of the most fond things that we priests that graduated from Holy Cross remember is the chanting of the evening psalm, Lord, I have cried unto you. And the reason why is that we had to learn how to chant this in many different ways. And as I grew as a priest and as an Orthodox Christian, I would learn different things about this hymn and about the traditions of our church. Lord, I have cried to you, hear me. Hear me, O Lord. Lord, I have cried to you, hear me. Give heed to the voice of my supplication. When I cry to you, hear me. Let my prayer rise as incense, and the lifting up of my hands be as an evening sacrifice. Again, this is the psalm that we chant on every Vesper service, and as pre-sanctified liturgy is a Vesper service that offers Holy Communion, it is chanted here as well. Many, many years ago, when I had the opportunity to stay at a Greek Orthodox monastery, I was there for the pre-sanctified liturgy, and as I was there, I noticed that they placed a candle in front of the altar, and you can see it there right now, this one lone candle burning in front of the altar. So I asked the abbot, who is now a very, very dear friend and father confessor, I said, why the candle in front of the royal doors? And he said, you know, there are practical reasons why we do things in the church, but this, to him, he was taught from Mount Athos that it had a beautiful, mystical reason, if you will. And he says, if you recall, Adam and Eve, after they disobeyed God, were exiled from paradise. But where did they go? Well, they stayed close to the gates of paradise. They didn't go far. They were camped out there, and they began to make their lives, unfortunately, looking at the gates of paradise that were guarded by the angel with a flaming sword. And the tradition of the church says that in the evening, Adam would become nostalgic for the Garden of Eden, for living in God's presence, and he would say, Lord, I have cried out to you, hear me. Hear me, O Lord, I have cried out to you, hear me. Give heed to the voice of my supplication. We, today especially, need to call upon God to ask for his presence in our life, to hear our cry and to hear our prayer. There are times many of us will feel quite alone in the world. We might be even with people, but still we feel a sense of loneliness, a sense of isolation. But as we've taught our children, and as I was taught as a child, you do your cross and know that God is with us. God is with us. A couple of the hymns tonight that were sung after this psalm talk about this desire to be with God and Christ literally reaching out to grab us and to touch us. The one hymn says, venture your hand to grasp mine like Peter's, and to draw me up, O God, from the perils of the deep. The illustration here is when Peter saw Jesus walking on the water. He said, bid me, Lord, that I come out with you. He says, come on. And Peter began to walk on the water himself, and then he saw the waves, and he felt the wind, and he became frightened and began to sink. And he said, Lord, please help me. And Jesus grabbed his hand and drew Peter up to him. That's what we want from our God. That's what we are praying for. Lord, I have cried out to you. Venture your hand to grasp mine like Peter's. Draw me up, O God, from the perils of the deep. And then this hymn continues, grant me the gift of your grace and mercy. Grace and mercy. What wonderful gifts that God gives us. Grace, charisma, his presence, and that grace manifests itself in so many different ways. God's grace gives us a tenderness of heart. It allows us to understand the difficulties and hardships of others. It develops within us gifts that we have that we might not know we have. The gift of prayer, the gift of fasting, the gift of going to confession, the gift of preparing for and receiving the greatest gift of Holy Communion. Grant me the gift of your grace and your mercy. This mercy comes from the Greek word eleon, that it pours out over us and runs down us and clings to us. And that's what we want from God, for his mercy and his grace to come upon us. The next hymn says, with every day that comes, I am chanting, Lord, you are the Lamb of God who takes away all my sins. Into your hands I commit my being. The person who wrote this hymn takes the words from Jesus as he's dying on the cross and says, where he says, into my hands I commit my soul, my spirit. And now we are saying the same to God. Into your hands I commit my being, all that we are. Tonight, as we proceed through Great Lent, and as we grow closer and closer to Holy Week and Pascha, and it's going to be a very, very different Holy Week and a very, very different Easter this year, but it's still going to be Holy Week and Easter. It's still going to be the celebration of the passion of Jesus Christ and his resurrection from the dead. It's still going to be that today Christ is hung upon the cross and today he is risen from the dead. As we grow closer to celebrate that, cry out to the Lord, seek God, grab on to his hand as he extends it down to you. Be drawn up to God. Allow his mercy and grace to come upon you. Know that he takes away your sin and commit yourself to him. God bless you.